working hard to get my fill. Everybody wants a thrill, paying anything to roll the dice just one more time. Some will win, some will lose. Some were even born to sing the blues. Oh, the movie goes on and on. It never ends. It goes on and on and on and on. Don't stop believing. Okay, any sermon that begins with the lyrics of a 1980s rock ballad is immediately suspect. But if you can remember the name of that band, it will prepare you for my message. Let's go to Luke 24. Cleopas and another person are on the road to Emmaus. Interestingly, we have no idea where Emmaus is. That little village was lost to history at some point. But we think it was about 10 or 12 kilometers from Jerusalem. Interestingly, no one knows exactly how long a kilometer is either. Now, Cleopas, we don't know who that is as well. Cleopas, he was a follower of Jesus, but he's not named in the list of the disciples, of course. He's not one of the 12. But you know, there were many other followers around Jesus than just the 12, lots of men and women. And in fact, many scholars believe this other person on the road to Emmaus with Cleopas is his wife. There's a tendency in patriarchies not to name the women, and they were coming back from the Passover from Jerusalem, so it probably is Cleopas and his wife heading back to Emmaus. And then, as they're walking, the risen Christ appears as a stranger and draws up alongside them and says to them, "What are you talking about?" That seems a little bit nosy. But Cleopas says to him, haven't you heard about Jesus of Nazareth? That's what we're talking about. Now starts some humor because he's chastising Jesus about not knowing about Jesus. And he goes on to provide a synopsis that this Jesus of Nazareth and his ministry, but then he was condemned and crucified, and that now they've heard from some followers that he has been resurrected. There's a pretty rich humor here as he tells Jesus about Jesus. And then Jesus, they don't know it's Jesus yet, chastises him for not understanding the scriptures. Don't you know that this was predicted, that the Messiah must suffer? So the risen Christ holds a sort of bipedal Bible study on this road. As they're walking along, they go through the scriptures. When they finally get to the village, they invite him in for dinner. They still don't know who he is. And then when he is breaking the bread, they recognize him as the risen Christ. Here might be a little pitch from the historic church about the efficacy of the Eucharist, but he appears, and once they recognize him, he disappears. Here's a hint that all authentic mystical experiences are transient, they're fleeting. If they're not fleeting, they're charlatanry, not real mysticism. Mysticism, spiritual experiences happen on their own and they're transient. It's a wonderful story, the road to Emmaus. Maybe one of the most popular stories in the Bible. One reason I think it's so popular is its journey motif. Journey. We love that as the image of the spiritual life. We talk all the time about the spiritual journey. Journey, there's the name of the band. I like the name Journey. Some of the members of that band came from another band named Frumious Bandersnatch. And so we can be glad for the name change, journey. That is the single most popular metaphor for the spiritual life, a spiritual journey. In fact, one statistical analysis showed that the most popular word used on church websites in America is journey. We love it. In fact, many churches now are named the Journey Church or Journey Church. Google it, they're all over the country. It is our primary metaphor for the spiritual. Now, there are other metaphors. We could call it the spiritual container, and we could talk about whether we are filled or feeling empty. That would be a good metaphor for the spiritual life, spiritual container. Or you could call it the spiritual building, and we could talk about our doors being opened for you, or are you making your way to higher levels or floors? You could use other metaphors to describe our spiritual lives. You could talk about a spiritual operating system and wondering if you have good code. You know, you have to debug yourself sometimes. You could use other metaphors, but I love the metaphor of a spiritual journey. I think there's a few reasons it's become so central as a metaphor. Number one, it has a sort of sound of adventure to it, a journey, a spiritual journey, adventure and some heroism. I think it resonates with the Homeric epics and about how we journey forth and we face various tribulations and we become wiser, we become stronger because of it, the spiritual journey. You know, Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, said that story out of Homer, the hero's journey, where you head forth into the unknown and you face struggles and you become stronger and wiser. He called it the monomyth, meaning the one myth that can be found in cultures all over the world. We love that story, and we love thinking of ourselves on a spiritual journey. And we will face difficulties, and we will become stronger if we keep forging forward. We'll become wiser. It's a great metaphor. I also think we love this metaphor, spiritual journey, because it talks not so much about a destination specifically or a goal, but you have to learn to appreciate the journey itself. Oh, we could do well to remember that. Life is not all about goals and objectives. In fact, if you're always focused on your goals, but not experiencing the process, life itself, if you're not enjoying the journey, you'll miss most of life. You know, the mindfulness movement speaks of this, that you have to be present in the moment and paying close attention to what's happening now, not always having your head in the future. I think something about the spiritual journey motif helps us value progress over perfection, or the moment over just our objectives. We're on the journey. Religion can tend to be goal-oriented. You can think religion itself is all about getting into heaven, or the end goal. And we could forget that religion is also about bringing a piece of heaven to this moment, living differently, more fully. Metaphor spiritual journey highlights that. I also think we love spiritual journey as a metaphor because it emphasizes the individual. I'm on my journey, my particular journey as Jim. You're on your journey. And I think it's important to realize that religion ultimately is an individual thing. Religion is something that's close to your heart and wrapped up in your hopes and expectations and dreams. So when we say spiritual journey, we're acknowledging that each one might be different, this spiritual journey. You know, we have an ethic in the Congregational Church. It's called freedom of the individual conscience. And I love that. It recognizes that you are a person. You would have your own understanding of God and Christ and doctrines and the church and religious wisdom, your own particular take. And the freedom of the individual conscience means that no creed or doctrine should simply be imposed upon you. That Congregationalists believe you must have this freedom to understand God in your way, Christ in your way. And then we gather as individuals in a church and learn from one another. I love that spiritual journey seems to highlight that individual aspect of religion. Well, those are the reasons that spiritual journey, I think, is such a popular metaphor. But there are always downsides to any metaphor you choose. And I worry about a couple of the downsides when we always talk about being on a spiritual journey. One is it sounds like it's all about our effort or our success. How are you doing on your journey? We lose a sense of grace. Spirituality is not all about achievement or how far you can get along. There's grace. Much of life is simply a gift from God. Spiritual journey might take away one of the most amazing aspects of the gospel proclamation, that you don't have to earn anything. You know, this is a radical part of our gospel. It says you don't earn your salvation. It's not based on works or whether you succeed. You don't have to earn it at all or achieve it. It's given to you. Salvation, fullness, love. We're an achievement culture. I love the idea of excellence, but our gospel balances this with, it's okay if you don't perfectly succeed. There's grace. I also worry that the spiritual journey metaphor might heighten our individualism too much because there's such a value to community. We're rediscovering this right now, coming out of the pandemic. There is such a value to community. And we're not on a journey alone. We have each other. Wow. I'm just talking about a metaphor. But what really matters is, how are you doing? And if we use that metaphor, let me just ask you, how are you doing on your spiritual journey? And I just want you to know this, that it's not all up to you. The spiritual journey isn't about what you'll achieve. There'll be grace. It's not all up to you, and you're not alone. There is community. There is church. On this spiritual journey, we're together, and we live in grace. Amen.